I died at 3:07 a.m. on a Tuesday, and somehow I'm still here to tell you about it. Let me back up. My name is Marcus Chen, and I'm a night shift nurse at Mercy General in downtown Philadelphia. Or I was, before everything changed. Before I learned that some folklore isn't just stories old people tell to scare children into behaving. Before I understood that the thing my grandmother whispered about in Portuguese, her voice dropping to barely a murmur whenever she mentioned O Corpo Secco, wasn't just superstition from the old country. It was a warning. And I should have listened. It started 3 weeks ago, on a humid August night when the air felt thick enough to chew. I'd just finished a brutal 12-hour shift in the ICU, losing 2 patients in the span of 4 hours, and I needed to walk. That's what I do when the weight of death becomes too heavy, when I can still hear the flatline tone echoing in my skull. I walk until my legs ache and my mind goes numb. The hospital is on Frankfurt Avenue, and there's this stretch between Orthodox and Bridge Street that stays quiet even during the day. At night it becomes something else entirely. The streetlights cast these pools of sickly yellow light that never quite reach the shadows between them, and the old row homes lean in close like they're trying to hear your thoughts. Most people avoid it. But that night, exhausted and hollow, I didn't care. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not the usual city smell of exhaust and garbage and hot asphalt, but something organic and wrong. It reminded me of the anatomy lab from medical school, that particular combination of formaldehyde and decay that clings to the back of your throat. I remember pausing mid-step, my sneakers squeaking on the cracked sidewalk and looking around. The street was empty, no cars, no people, not even the usual scatter of rats that ruled these blocks after dark. Just that smell, getting stronger with every breath. Then I heard it, a scraping sound like bone on concrete. Slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere behind me. I turned, and at first I saw nothing but the empty street and those pools of diseased light. But then, at the very edge of the nearest streetlight's reach, something moved in the darkness. Not walked, moved. Like it was being pulled forward by invisible strings, its limbs jerking in a rhythm that had nothing to do with how a human body should move. I told myself it was a homeless person. Philadelphia has thousands of them, especially in this neighborhood. Maybe someone high on whatever new synthetic drug was making the rounds. I even started to call out, some stupid question about whether they needed help, when the thing stepped fully into the light and the words died in my throat like they'd been strangled. It was tall, too tall, at least 7 feet, maybe more, with limbs that seemed to go on forever, thin and desiccated like beef jerky left in the sun for months. The skin, if you could call it that, was the color of old leather, stretched so tight over the bones that I could see every ridge and valley of the skeleton beneath. But it was the head that made my bladder almost let go. The skull was almost bare, with only a few long strands of black hair hanging in greasy, uneven patches, some sections completely missing as if they'd been torn out in clumps. The eye sockets were deep and hollow, but there was something in them. Not eyes, but a kind of luminescence, like foxfire in a rotting log. A cold, greenish glow that fixed on me with an intelligence that was worse than any human malice I'd ever encountered. Its mouth hung open, revealing teeth that were too long, too sharp, filed down to points or maybe just worn that way from gnawing on things I didn't want to imagine. And from that mouth came a sound. Not words, not exactly. More like the death rattle of someone drowning in their own fluids, but sustained, continuous, rising and falling like a terrible song. I should have run. Every instinct I had screamed at me to run. But I couldn't move. It was like my nervous system had been unplugged. I just stood there, rooted to that cracked sidewalk, watching as the thing moved closer. Each step was accompanied by that scraping sound, and now I could see why. Its feet, if you could call them feet, were dragging across the concrete. The toes bent at impossible angles, the toenails grown long and yellow like talons. The smell intensified. Not just formaldehyde anymore, but something deeper. The smell of a body left too long in a closed room. The smell of liquefaction and putrefaction. The smell of meat going bad. My medical training tried to kick in, tried to catalogue what I was seeing in clinical terms, but this wasn't something from any textbook. This was something else entirely. It was maybe 10 feet away when my paralysis finally broke. I stumbled backward, nearly falling over my own feet, and that seemed to trigger something in the creature. It lunged forward with a speed that should have been impossible for something that moved so awkwardly, and I felt fingers, cold and hard as iron rods, brush against my jacket. I screamed. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I screamed like I'd never screamed before and took off running. I don't remember the next few minutes clearly, just fragments. The slap of my shoes on concrete, the burning in my lungs, the sound of that thing behind me, that scraping, dragging sound interspersed with that terrible death rattle breathing. I remember passing darkened houses, their windows like blind eyes, and wondering if anyone was looking out, if anyone could see what was chasing me. I remember thinking that I should bang on a door, should scream for help. But somehow I knew deep in my marrow that no one would answer. That the thing behind me had claimed this street, this moment, and anyone foolish enough to be out here was fair game. I made it 4 blocks before my lungs gave out. I collapsed against a chain-link fence outside an abandoned lot, gasping, my vision swimming with black spots. And the scraping had stopped. I looked back down the street, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. But there was nothing there. Just empty pavement and those yellow streetlights and the shadows between them. I stayed there for maybe 20 minutes, maybe an hour. Time had lost all meaning. Finally, when my legs stopped shaking enough to support my weight, I made my way home, keeping to the brightest streets I could find, jumping at every sound. I told myself it had been a hallucination, sleep deprivation, stress, the cumulative weight of too many deaths and too many night shifts. I'd seen things before when I was tired enough. Shadows that moved wrong. Faces in the corners of my vision. This was just more of the same. It had to be. But I couldn't explain the scratches on my jacket where those fingers had touched it. 3 parallel tears in the heavy denim, clean and precise, like they'd been made with a razor blade. I didn't go back to that street. For 2 weeks I took a different route home, even though it added 15 minutes to my walk. I told myself I was being ridiculous, but I couldn't shake the memory of those hollow, glowing eyes, that skeletal frame dragging itself forward with terrible purpose. I started researching online during my breaks at work. At first I searched for Creature Philadelphia and Urban Legend Frankfurt Avenue, but found nothing. Then I remembered my grandmother's stories, the ones she'd tell in the dim light of her kitchen while making pastel de nata, her voice dropping to a whisper when she talked about the thing that hunted in Brazil, the thing that had supposedly driven her family to leave their village. O corpo seco, the dry corpse. According to the legends she'd shared, it was the body of a person so evil, so steeped in sin, that even the earth rejected them after death. Unable to decompose, unable to rest, they rose again as something neither living nor dead, cursed to wander forever, hunting anyone foolish enough to be out in the hours when the boundary between worlds grew thin. 3 in the morning, the devil's hour, the hour when the dead walk. I'd laughed at her stories when I was a kid, but sitting in the break room at 2 a.m. reading account after account from people in Brazil who claimed to have seen the creature, who described the same desiccated body, the same patchy hair, the same glowing eyes and dragging gait, I wasn't laughing anymore. Especially when I found a forum post from someone in Philadelphia, dated 8 months ago, describing an encounter on Frankfurt Avenue. The post had been dismissed as creative writing, but the details were too similar. The smell, the scraping sound, the impossible speed when it lunged. The last line of the post stuck with me. I don't know if it followed me here, or if there's more than one. But whatever you do, stay inside at 3 a.m. It's hunting. The user had never posted again. I managed to convince myself that I was safe as long as I avoided that street, as long as I stayed vigilant. I even started to relax a little. The memory of that night began to feel distant, dreamlike, something that had happened to someone else. And then came last Tuesday. My shift had been particularly grueling. A multi-vehicle accident on I-95 had filled the ICU with broken bodies, and I'd spent hours running from room to room, trying to keep people alive who probably should have died on impact. By the time 3 a.m. rolled around, I was so exhausted that I could barely think straight. I left the hospital on autopilot, my feet carrying me down the familiar path before my brain registered where I was going. I was on Frankfurt Avenue, walking through that dead zone between Orthodox and Bridge before I realized my mistake. The smell hit me first, stronger than before, so strong that I gagged, my eyes watering. And then the scraping sound, but this time it was coming from multiple directions. I spun around, and my blood turned to ice water. There were 3 of them. One ahead of me, blocking the way forward. One behind. One emerging from an alley to my right. All identical, all impossibly tall and skeletal, with that same patchy hair and glowing eyes and mouths full of pointed teeth. They moved in perfect synchronization, like they were 3 parts of the same organism, closing in slowly, savoring my terror. I ran left, the only direction that was still open, my exhaustion forgotten in the flood of adrenaline. But the street dead-ended at a construction site, orange barriers and chain-link fencing blocking the way. I was trapped. I heard that death rattle breathing getting closer, coming from all sides now, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was going to die. That's when I saw it. A gap in the fencing where someone had cut through the chain link to use the construction site as a shortcut. I squeezed through, the metal catching on my scrubs, tearing the fabric. Behind me I heard a sound like a scream, but wrong, inverted, a sound that came from somewhere deep underground. The creatures were angry. The construction site was a maze of equipment and half-built walls, and I plunged into it blindly, my only thought to put distance between myself and those things. I could hear them behind me, could hear the scraping of their feet on gravel and the rattle of their breathing, but the narrow spaces and obstacles seemed to slow them down. I ducked under a beam, vaulted over a pile of rebar, and found myself in the shell of what would eventually be a building. 4 walls, but no roof, open to the night sky. And there, in the center of the space, I saw something that made no sense. A circle scratched into the concrete floor, maybe 6 feet in diameter, with symbols carved around the edge. They looked old, older than the construction, like they'd been there long before anyone broke ground on this site. And around the circle, someone had placed 7 white candles. I didn't stop to think. I jumped into the circle just as the first of the creatures appeared in the doorway. It rushed forward faster than before, its mouth open in that terrible inverted scream, its arms outstretched. I saw every detail with horrible clarity, the way its ribs showed through the papery skin, the way its fingers ended in nails that looked more like claws, the way the greenish glow in its eye sockets intensified as it focused on me. And then it hit the edge of the circle and stopped, like it had run into an invisible wall. The impact was audible, a thud that I felt in my chest. The creature recoiled, that death rattle rising to a shriek. The other 2 appeared, flanking the first, and they all reached toward me, their arms stretching into the circle, but only so far. After a few inches, their hands seemed to encounter some barrier, something that held them back. They could see me. They could probably smell me, but they couldn't reach me. I don't know how long I sat there in that circle, watching those things claw at the air, their movements becoming more frenzied, more desperate. Hours, maybe. Or maybe only minutes that felt like hours. Eventually the sky began to lighten. The black of night gave way to the deep blue of pre-dawn, and as the first rays of sun touched the horizon, the creatures began to retreat. Slowly at first, then faster, dragging themselves backward into the shadows. By the time the sun was fully up, they were gone. I stayed in that circle until I heard the construction workers arriving, their voices and the sound of equipment breaking the spell. When I finally stood, my legs were numb, and I had to grip the wall to keep from falling. One of the workers found me, asked if I was okay, if I needed an ambulance. I must have looked like hell. I told him I'd gotten lost, had spent the night hiding from some guys who'd tried to rob me. He seemed to accept this, even walked me to the street and waited until I caught a cab. I didn't go home. I went to my grandmother's house in Rawnhurst. She's 93 now, living in a nursing home, but the house is still there, still filled with her things. I let myself in with the spare key and went straight to her bedroom, to the old trunk at the foot of her bed, where she kept the important things. Birth certificates, immigration papers, and underneath it all, wrapped in cloth that smelled of lavender and something sharper, a leather-bound book written in Portuguese. I spent the next 3 days translating it with Google and an old Portuguese-English dictionary. It was a journal kept by my great-great-grandmother, documenting her family's history with O Corpo Secco, how it had hunted their village, how they'd learned to protect themselves with circles and symbols and prayers, how it had followed them when they'd tried to leave, appearing in the new places they'd settled, always hunting at 3 a.m., always drawn to those who walked alone in the darkest hours. The journal explained that O Corpo Secco wasn't just one creature. It was a curse, a kind of spiritual infection that could spread. Those it killed could rise as new Corpo Secco, adding to their numbers, creating a hunting pack that grew with each victim. The only way to stop them was to stay out of their reach during the hunting hour, to use the old protections, and to never ever go out alone at 3 a.m. The last entry in the journal was from my grandmother, dated 1962. We thought we'd left it behind in Brazil. We were wrong. It's here. It's always been here. The curse doesn't care about geography. It goes where the evil goes, where the dead refuse to rest. I've drawn the protective circles in 3 places in Philadelphia. If you're reading this, you've seen it too. Stay inside at 3 a.m. Don't let it catch you. Don't become one of them. I quit my job at Mercy General. I couldn't work nights anymore. Couldn't risk being out during those hours. I told them it was for health reasons, which wasn't exactly a lie. I've moved twice since that night, always making sure my new place has strong locks and clear sight lines from every window. I've drawn my own protective circle in my bedroom, copying the symbols from my great-great-grandmother's journal. And I've started documenting my own experiences, adding to the family record, because I know now that this isn't over. O Corpo Secco is still out there, hunting in the dead hours, dragging itself through the darkness of Philadelphia's streets. I've heard reports, other people who've seen it, other people who've run. Some of them made it, some of them didn't. Last week, I drove past the construction site where I'd hidden in the circle. The building is finished now, a modern apartment complex with floor-to-ceiling windows and a rooftop terrace. Young professionals are moving in, drawn by the low rent and the proximity to the subway. I wanted to stop, to warn them, to tell them to stay inside at 3 a.m. no matter what. But what would I say? How could I make them believe? So instead, I'm writing this. I'm putting it out there, on every forum and blog and social media platform I can find, hoping that someone will read it and take it seriously. If you live in Philadelphia, especially in Frankfurt, or anywhere along that corridor between Orthodox and Bridge Street, please listen to me. Stay inside at 3 a.m. Lock your doors. Don't go out alone. And if you smell formaldehyde and decay on the night air, if you hear that scraping sound of bone on concrete, if you see something tall and skeletal dragging itself toward you through the pools of streetlight, run. Run and don't look back. Find a protected space, a circle, a church, anything with threshold wards or sacred ground. And if you can't run, if you're trapped, if those cold iron fingers close around your throat and you feel your life draining away into that desiccated corpse, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Because I know what comes next. I know that you'll rise again, your body rejected by the earth, cursed to hunt and kill and drag yourself through the darkness for eternity. adding your voice to that chorus of death rattles that echo through the night. I survived my encounter with O Corpus Echo, but I'm not free. I see it sometimes, in my peripheral vision, a tall shadow standing at the end of my street at 3 a.m. It knows where I am. It's patient. It can wait. And someday, I'll make a mistake. I'll forget to lock a door, or I'll be forced to go out during the hunting hour, or maybe the protective circles will fail. And when that happens, when those cold fingers close around me again, there won't be any escape. Until then, I'm trapped in this half-life, this existence between the living and the dead. I'm a survivor, yes, but survival has its own cost. Every night at 3 a.m., I wake up, my heart pounding, listening for that scraping sound. Every shadow makes me flinch. Every unexpected smell of decay sends me spiraling back to that night on Frankfurt Avenue. So please, if you take nothing else from my story, take this. Respect the old warnings. Respect the folklore that our grandmothers whispered about. Because sometimes the monsters are real. Sometimes the dead don't rest. And sometimes the thing dragging itself toward you in the darkness used to be human, before it became something far worse. I died at 3:07 a.m. on a Tuesday. My heart stopped when those cold fingers brushed my jacket. I felt it stop. Felt the absence where the beat should be. Felt myself starting to slip away into whatever comes next. But the circle saved me. The old magic my ancestors brought from Brazil pulled me back, jump-started my heart, gave me another chance. I don't know if I'll get another one. So stay inside at 3 a.m. Please, don't let your story end the way mine almost did. Don't become another name in my family's journal, another victim of O Corpus Echo, another corpse too dry and evil for even the earth to accept. Because if you see it once, it never stops hunting you. And I would know. Because it's 2:58 a.m. right now, and I can hear scraping on my sidewalk.